and welcome to another episode of Just Onside. And as usual, I've always got my main man, Ois. How are you, Ois?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. Ayub, how are you?
I've been under the weather, as you know, on the mend, very slowly, but on the mend. And as you will see, there's a stranger in one of the boxes. It's not Ois. Obviously it's not Ois because Ois is over there. It's not Baj, but we've got international. We've got a dear friend and colleague of ours, Dennis, and he's in Belgium. So, Dennis, how are you, sir?
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. It's a huge honor to be here. So I'm fine and happy to join you guys. So looking forward to it.
Absolutely delighted to have you on the show. And there's a reason why we've got Dennis on the show. Now, normally, if there's anything Man United, it would be Baj, but the man's gone missing. We've no idea where he is. I think I did see him at work, but apart from that, he's like the Scarlet Pimpernel. So we've done the next best thing. We've got a guy who's passionate about Manchester United. And Dennis is very passionate, but I presume is quite a frustrated individual at this moment in time. They've had a very, very dodgy season so far, Manchester United. And who better to ask exactly how the season's going and how they feel than a Manchester United supporter? So, Dennis, after last season, you must have been quite optimistic, quite excited. This season is not quite going the way that Manchester United fans expected. So there's a lot of questions. So really the first question I want to ask is what were your expectations at the start of the season for Manchester United?
I think the expectations, coming of course from last year where we had a quite good season, of course not exceptional, but we started the season really bad last year, starting with two losses, I think, against Brighton at home and against Brentford for thinking in the beginning of the season, okay, this will be real difficult. But things turned around and actually were quite good and things got better. And the feeling like, okay, maybe not competing for the title. Last year, of course, that I think at New Year we were not that far away, and there were still some hopes. At the end, we finished on place 3, which was okay given where we started and also where we ended the year before. So for this year, I did not really expect us to join the title race, but I hope just that we were a little bit closer than we were last year. And maybe I also expect City to be better, but maybe just defeat Arsenal and become second. That would be already the next step. But of course, how it went this year, it's a little bit different.
It's been go on, Oris.
I was just going to say, you talk about, Dennis, the how last season unfolded, but kind of going into this season, were you a little bit disappointed in terms of the recruitment in the summer, in terms of the targets that they perhaps could have gone for? Harry Kane notably, obviously Declan Rice was on the move this summer, Moses Caicedo, other big players as well who joined let's say kind of Premier League clubs or joined other big clubs in Europe. Were you a little bit disappointed in terms of the type of player that they were going after in the summer? Because a lot of I guess the footballing fraternity felt that Manchester United were ready to take that step, and normally the recruitment gives you some indicator. What were your thoughts in terms of some of the targets that they went after and landed?
Yeah, I think so, especially the striker position, as for already a couple of years, it's often a problem at United. Also looking last year, I think Rashford made almost all our goals. So depending on one player is never good. You see it this year when he's not performing that well, that we really have issues with that. So they went after Højlund. I have to be honest, at that moment when they start the conversations, I didn't know him because I'm not really following Atalanta that well. And of course, we all knew Harry Kane would probably be free. And knowing what he did, of course, in the Premier League the last 10 years, it's quite a safe investment. Although I have to say, like the negative part is, of course, that he's already a little bit older, so maybe it's only for a couple of years. But we just hope to bring a striker who makes like 20 goals a season. And I'm not sure if that's the case right now with Højlund. Didn't make any goal, I think, in the Premier League so far. Champions League, he did made a couple of goals. But it was not a striker I hoped for in I would say in May or June. So I hoped we really have a top striker with a big name like Harry Kane. That was a little bit of disappointment. I think the striker position was for me crucial at that moment. Of course, also the goalkeeper. have to say that when they said Onana was coming to United, I was quite positive because he played last year a good year at Inter, also in Champions League. I think also last week in the Ballon d'Or he ended
Yeah.
in the top 20, so that says something. So I was quite positive because of the fact that De Gea had done a lot of good things for our club, of course, but yeah, the last couple of years there were also some silly mistakes, and football-wise, it was not always the best goalkeeper. So for me, I felt at the moment something needs to change, and I hope that there was a good solution at that moment.
Just on that, sorry, yeah.
Just before I go, you did you
Yeah.
hear that? He said that Dennis mentioned how Onana finished in the top 20 in the Ballon d'Or voting. A goalkeeper you rate quite highly, right?
Well, that's what I mean. I'm astonished. I must confess, I didn't know. I mean, he obviously must be decent because you don't pay 40 million. But I've not seen anything at all from Onana, which makes me convinced that he's an upgrade on David De Gea. I think he's a downgrade at this moment in time. But just on David De Gea, as a Manchester United fan, David De Gea. I mean, myself and Lewis have talked about this. I mean, he's been a wonderful servant to Manchester United. But what did you think of the way that he was moved out of the club? Because there was normally, when a player's played for that length of time, there's some sort of celebration of at least the time that he's had at Manchester United. This was just he was almost snuck out the back door. Nobody really knew, and it was just a case of, right, you're on your way, and that's it. And there was no real tribute to a player who I think has given so much to Manchester United. So, as a United fan, what's your thoughts on the way that De Gea left Manchester United?
Yeah, I think indeed that's not the right way to leave, of course, because although he had some the last couple of years, not always the best performances, but I remember the first years he was there, I think almost every year was player of the season at Man United. So, also a lot of records he broke, I think most clean sheets and stuff like that. So even if you decide to part ways, which is understandable after a while, just give him like the farewell that he deserves. I think for example, yeah, Real Madrid is my other team in Spain, and there were some players like, for example, Marcelo. They know already for a year he was going to leave, but they got a big celebration,
Yeah.
and a big thank you, for what he did for the club. Although they knew, we're not going to renew because the level is not there anymore or not sufficient enough. You can give a good farewell. The last home game, for example, that he got applauded for by the whole stadium and things like that with his family, and that didn't happen, and that's not the right way to treat people to treat players. It's so much for the club, so that's a shame, and I think that's one of the things that it's going wrong at the club, like how we treat some players. So I'm absolutely not happy with the way that went. No.
Yeah, that was the thing that I wanted to pick up on. Is that symptomatic of what's wrong at Manchester United at this moment in time? Because really, I mean, I think there's a number of things not quite right. I mean, I'll take Lewis's views as well afterwards on this, but there is something which is just not right at this football club. There seems to be a lot of there seems to be lots of conflict. There seems to be I mean, there was issues with we talked about this already. McTominay, Harry Maguire, Rashford. I mean, I 3 or 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I thought he would be one of the best players in the world. He's going backwards every single year. He appears to have moments where he's playing okay, but then suddenly he goes off the boil again. I mean, there's probably many things, but could you, or as a Manchester United fan, is there anything that you think is fundamentally wrong with the club? If you had to put your finger on saying, right, this is one of the major issues, what do you think as a United fan is the major issue at United at the moment?
I think it's difficult to say, but if you look already that it's already for 10 years since Sir Alex Ferguson left, that things are going wrong completely. So I don't think it's just a manager thing. I think it's higher, so that you see a lot of things in years we have a small upgrade and then we go down again, and that's so I think it's more on the top of the club and how the club is structured. I think last week also Guardiola made a comment about Man City, why it's going so well and so consistent, that he said like everyone in the club is looking in the same way and thinking on the same things. So of course he is a manager, but also sporting directors, the board and stuff like that. And I think that's going wrong at Man United also, that there are different opinions and not following the same idea. And maybe some people, I don't know that well, but maybe some people also in the club are not good enough in their job to run the club, I would say. So so I think these things are going on, but as a fan, it's sometimes difficult to know what's happening inside a club, of course.
OS, as an Arsenal supporter, but you're a fair Arsenal supporter. I mean, there's people like me who are almost enjoying the demise at Manchester United, but I'm a Leeds supporter. But as an Arsenal supporter who's quite fair, what's your thoughts on what fundamentally is wrong with Manchester United? Because we've talked about it last season, a couple of trophies. It seemed as if they'd turned a corner. It seemed that they had a manager who was finally, I wouldn't sort of say he's Alex Ferguson-esque, but certainly a manager who's got a tremendous reputation, who's obviously got a great deal of respect and reverence, but it seems to have fallen by the wayside. So what's your thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting. Just piggybacking off what Dennis mentioned about what Guardiola said. I think he mentioned, didn't he, Dennis, about how after the Champions League defeat, when Havertz went through and scored for Chelsea and Chelsea won that Champions League final, he spoke about it then, that the chairman told him then, we will win this competition, don't worry. And there was kind of any kind of blame culture or what have you. And there you go, a couple of years on, and they do lift that trophy. So I take Dennis's point well, and it is one of my fundamental kind of beliefs that if a club's going to be successful consistently, and that's the phrase, then top to bottom, the entire club, as best as possible, has got to be geared for success, and that means kind of decision making, recruitment, structure, and the rest of it, and having an elite coach at the helm who you trust. So those points are definitely well taken. I'm glad we've structured the conversation like this, because at the end I want to put it to Dennis and yourself, Ayub, whether you think that this is now inevitable, that the coach will pay with his job. But in terms of what's gone wrong, I mean, normally Badge is quite keen to keep a time and restrict me on this, but we don't have enough time to go through all the ills of Manchester United. If you remember going into the international break, I said this was the developing story of the champions of the Premier League season, and there we have it now, probably about 6-7 weeks on. Here we go, is probably the biggest story of the Premier League. For me, in terms of what's gone wrong, is that, I mean, there's a number of things. I think last year when there was a lot of talk about them obviously reaching the Carabao Cup final, winning that against Newcastle, I actually thought Newcastle were the better team in the final, just my opinion. But I thought Manchester United won the moments, which I guess in the final, that's all you want to do. You want to win the moments. Similar with kind of Real Madrid a couple of years ago, Dennis, right? With Liverpool. Definitely not the better team, although second half they improved, but you win the big moments, big performance from your goalkeeper. Finals off for winning. But everything else, I guess, is about developing a style of play that's consistent. And last year, even though they got to the FA Cup final, and there was a bit of talk at the end of we covered it on the podcast, who had the better season, Arsenal or Man United. And I defended strongly that it was Arsenal, because what Arsenal had was, and I'm going to use the S word, was sustainable, because you could see clearly that there was a style of play that they were going to be able to kind of consistently play with that was going to mean they were going to win more games than not, right? It didn't mean... Could they take those kind of last steps in terms of winning the Premier League title? Well, last year they fell short. This year, let's see. The thing with Manchester United last year is, and Dennis, I don't know if you agree, but last year, I guess the style of play that they had to some extent at times was, I guess, sitting in a little bit and playing a little bit more in terms of kind of transitional counter-attacking football. And that served them well. If you remember, they've really not solved this striker situation. Obviously, Martial for a number of years, Weghorst on loan. So they've not really got much output from a striker, let's say. So they've been playing this kind of counter-attacking football, which suits Fernandes and Rashford. But then if you look at some of the signings that they've made, Ayub, it's all just very much a bit of a mishmash. Mount's pretty decent in pressing, but then Casemiro's quite aged, and you wonder whether or not his best years are behind him. He's already had an injury this season. He's now got a second injury with a hamstring strain. He's going to be out for several weeks. So that I would now question. When people were questioning Casemiro's signing, yeah, it looks good at the time that you've got this kind of world-class defensive midfielder who was an absolute beast, but then you give him a long-term contract, and all of a sudden in second year, injuries, doesn't quite look on it, so you question where that's going. But then, yeah, some of the other signings, obviously, you think about what Ten Hag's style was at Ajax, and what I admire about Ten Hag's words this week is he spoke about how he can't really play the style that he would do at Ajax. Whether you agree with him or disagree, I like from a philosophy perspective that he's not necessarily shoehorning his style into players that might not necessarily suit that style. He's trying to play with what he's got. But the recruitment's just been all over the shop. When they had a chance to get Kane this season, clearly, and pay whatever was needed to buy a world-class striker, something they've not solved for a number of years, they don't even really make too many strong inquiries. This idea that Spurs would not sell him, they would if for the right price. They absolutely would. You got to remember what Kane's contract situation was. So they buy Højlund, who may well be decent, Dennis, but in this day and age, you kind of need players, especially depending on what timeline you're on. You need players to start producing pretty much right from the get-go. So for me, recruitment's been a real mishmash this season. I've got a stat for you. This season, they have led in the Premier League, as in terms of number of minutes, the third lowest out of all teams. The other company that they're keeping, Sheffield United, 27 minutes they've led for in the Premier League. Luton, 66. Manchester United, 92. Bournemouth, 102. Burnley, 114. That is not the type of company you want to be keeping. So it's the fact of the matter is they've lost 8 of 15, I think, this season. We spoke about it last year. What I saw from their footballing style was their plan A of counter-attacking football better work really, really well. Otherwise, they're going to come a cropper. And this idea of man-to-man football with the personnel they have in midfield makes very little sense to me. I mean, how can you play explain this to me, right? And I'll give you the floor. They play man-to-man in midfield, which means that essentially all of those midfielders have to win their duels. If they don't, it just means one person's going to be wandering off for an attack. And you've got a midfield of not like a Caicedo or a Rice double pivot where you know athleticism is their number one quality. They've got like a Mount, Casemiro, Eriksen, even Fernandes sometimes in there. Athleticism is not necessarily their strongest suit, which means that quite often, I mean, I don't know if you saw the highlights this midweek for the Newcastle defeat. Mason Mount approaches Livramento. You'd think cover the outside channel because he's right-footed, and he just lets him drift by because he doesn't have that defensive nous. He doesn't have that defensive mindset about how to play. So for me, just in the first instance, I think what you're looking at is a manager who had a certain idea in mind last season. And I think last season he got a lot of grace because there wasn't much expectation. But then this year, when they've obviously had 2 cup finals and a 3rd place finish, as Dennis mentioned, this year, obviously, there's been a lot more eyeballs to say, right, we expect another step forward. And some of the recruitment's just been, I mean, I can't make any sense of it. They've spent 411 million under Erik ten Hag. And right now, you say, well, which one of those players is performing to the best of his ability? And you wouldn't be able to find one. So there's a lot of other reasons, but I think some of the tactics, some of the recruitment, some of the ideas in terms of style play, then switching to a more direct way of playing, they're second in terms of direct attacks to Aston Villa this season. It just seems very confusing, very complicated, and a different type of personnel suited to play a very different style. And what you're seeing is a product on the pitch that's very inconsistent right now. And they are essentially a mid-table team. And I think that's pretty much where they'll finish if they don't have a strong improvement in the second half of the season.
Go on, Dennis.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. So I think right now you see when we in all the games, there is no real cohesion in a team, and you see like some people are maybe attacking. And I think last year maybe I said Casemiro was at that moment top. So if the other players did maybe not so much in defense this year, I don't think he's yet at the level. It doesn't look fresh. So if you have people who you really rely on to do that job who are not doing that at the moment, then yeah, sometimes you see the whole midfield falls apart. And I think also other players, of course, are not performing well. So also the counter-attacking options you see in some games, players taking really strange decisions. I think Rashford already got booed at moments this year. Also, other players are doing making the wrong choices. So indeed, I think it's a lot of different players and not always working well. So indeed, what you said, like if you're going to play a defensive midfielder with players who need to support like Mount and like Eriksen, yeah, that's of course not the type of play they're gonna play. They need to play football, and that's just indeed like you said, not the right people that you take into the team, I would say.
Is this? What do you think? Is this ending only in one way now? What do you think?
It's looking that way. It's looking that way, and I just can't believe. I almost sort of think it's unforgivable for all the work and effort that Ten Hag must have put in last year to finish 3rd and to win 2 trophies. I mean, it's almost as if the platform's set, and how on earth he's managed to absolutely mess that up. Because, as you alluded to, they've spent a lot of money. Now, I've no idea how much influence Ten Hag has in terms of player recruitment. But I presume there obviously he is involved in the discussions, and I've got a feeling that after last season he would have probably been heavily involved. I just the identity. I mean, I'm not a Manchester United supporter, but I admire the football club, especially in the Ferguson era. There was an identity, and there was a certain caliber of player. They were all winners. They were all fighters, and you didn't really need. I mean, there was a coach, an exceptional coach in Ferguson, but you had 4, 5, 6 leaders on the pitch. If there was any dissent, the players would resolve that. I often watch. I mean, Gary Neville does this show where he brings on footballers, and there's a game that they feature, and I was watching one with Paul Scholes. And the way that they still talk about Ferguson, the way they talk about Manchester United, the way they talk about the culture of the football club, that to me is Manchester United. There is the club is bigger than any individual. So when you come to the club, there is a culture that you have to adapt to. I just don't think that's the case anymore. I don't know whether it's to do with the Glazers. I don't know whether it's to do with just the recruitment. It just seems to be a club that it has no direction, which, again, as a United fan, if I was, I'd be absolutely so annoyed after last season. I would have thought, right, now we're in a position where we need to make sure that when we buy players, we do our due diligence. I mean, I still can't believe and in a sense, maybe it's symptomatic of the reason why United are in the state that they are, that Fernandes is captain, club captain. I just cannot believe a character like that. And the man he's volatile. He's a hothead. He's somebody that is very temperamental. Now you could say about Keane that he was temperamental, but he was always a guy that would give it everything. He would expect and demand 100% from everybody. Fernandes is if he's not having a good game, it almost seems to be that sort of mindset that he's not having, he gets stroppy, and it sort of filters across the rest of the team. Keane would never do that. Keane was somebody that even if he's not playing well, he would demand that everybody else still kept at it. I just think it's a club that is absolutely rudderless at this moment, and I would have if Ten Hag was to be dismissed this week, I don't think any United fan should be surprised, because I think what is happening at this football club, I mean, the performance against Newcastle, it could have been double. I mean, it could have been 6. It was so easy. I mean, it was a stroll for Newcastle, albeit Newcastle are a decent football side, but it was so easy.
Yeah, but they were also playing their second 11, pretty much. Newcastle were.
Yeah. So it's. I think. I don't know whether the club have any thoughts in their mind, sort of saying, well, look, if this doesn't change in the next few weeks, we're going to have to make a decision. I've got a feeling they won't. I think they'll give him at least towards the end of the season. I mean, I don't think they're going to do anything now, because I think they've invested and maybe based on what he's done last year, maybe he's got some grace for at least the foreseeable future. But certainly as a United fan, I'd be saying, if this man is not capable of arresting the slide, which is quite a steep slide, but the problem is, you get rid of Ten Hag, who are you going to bring in? Because I think the problem is just not the coach. There is something very deep rooted, and you guys have both alluded to the fact that it's from the top right to the bottom. So maybe that's the problem. By just removing the coach, you're not really sort of dealing with the heart of the problem. I think United fans, I mean, obviously there's a number of United fans who watch this show. Please offer your thoughts. Is there a solution, or are you just going to? Is this season just a season that you're just waiting for it to pass by and then concentrate maybe on next season?
Yeah. No, I agree, and I would love to hear, because I would love to understand what the sentiment is right now, because it was pretty much Ten Hag, no issues, 100% approval rating going into season number 2. I'd be interested to see where it's at right now, because I do feel the tide is turning. Dennis, how do you see it in terms of, just to finish off on this topic, because I do want to finish off with 1 or 2 points. Do you think it would be deserved? What do you think he needs? Obviously, they've got Fulham away tomorrow morning or tomorrow lunchtime. How do you see it in terms of the next couple of games? Are you like Ayub, who thinks maybe he will get the grace until the end of the season? Or do you think actually he needs results in these next 1 or 2 games to keep his job? And do you think it would be deserved? How do you see it as a fan as well?
I think the next couple of games will be crucial because I think 2 or 3 games ago I was not really thinking about Ten Hag already leaving, but last 2 results were of course that dramatic. Where people start talking, and if that streak would go on a couple of more games, you know what will happen. I think because it can't go on like this. But on the other hand, of course, what Ayub also said, like if he leaves, what then? Because the problem is since Ferguson left, I think we already had 6 or 7 managers in the meantime. And with all of these managers, even there were big names with Van Gaal and Mourinho, for example, all the time it was sometimes a small period better,
Mm.
but in general it was always like a deception. So I'm not really sure what will happen when someone new has to come. Because, for example, last year, I think at a certain moment, I think around the moment we beat Barcelona in the Europa League, asking because everyone was really happy also with the Carabao Cup win at the same moment. What will you do? Buy Mbappe and let Ten Hag leave, or keep Ten Hag and don't buy Mbappe? And a lot of people said just keep Ten Hag because he's just reforming the club again, and that was the sentiment at that moment. And it's just like I think 8 months ago or something like that. So things can switch really quickly. But at the moment, you see also sometimes interviews afterwards. He doesn't know what's happening and he doesn't find the solution. That's frustrating. So there must come, of course, a change, but I'm not sure if we change Ten Hag, if it will get better. I think the problems are bigger than only Ten Hag.
Ayub doesn't rate Mbappe anyway, so we could move on from that. No, for sure. I mean, just a couple of points. I mean, I do want to answer the question myself as well, how I see it for him, for the manager. I mean, just one more thing on the style of play. This is what I don't understand. This year they've gone to a slightly more direct play. The statistics show that, right? And that was, I think, so if you remember, Dennis, you mentioned last year the Brighton Brentford games, right? And if you remember the back-to-back defeats, they had the goal that they conceded against Brentford when the ball was played into Eriksen. And at that point in time, they went to a kind of more direct play. But this year, with the acquisitions of Martinez last season, Onana this year, the idea of kind of Mount coming in and pressing from the front as well. It was a little bit more, let's go a bit more direct. You've got Højlund, McTominay further advanced, and they have gone a little bit more direct. The challenge you've got with that is, and the stats prove that out, the challenge you have with going to a slightly more direct way of playing, especially on a wide pitch like Old Trafford where you play half your games, is that all the more reason the game's going to be less susceptible to control. So what I mean is, if you're going to play direct, the ball's going to bounce around unless you've got a Drogba or an elite level striker who's going to hold the ball up. And Højlund's good, don't get me wrong, but he's not of that ilk, right? Yeah. So it just means the game's going to be a little bit more kind of helter-skelter, a bit more open, a lot more spaces. And that's all the more reason why, if you're going to play that style, you need midfielders, a double pivot, or something in that center of the park that can get about. So what I mean is like 10 yards running left, front, center, like the Caicedos, the Rices. I'm talking about guys who are elite athletes. So I don't understand. So take, for example, the Barcelona greatest midfield, right? Busquets, Xavi, Iniesta. Iniesta was wriggly, but he was never fast. But the reason why they functioned so well, although they had the greatest player of all time at the peak of his powers, is that they were controlling games. So they didn't need elite pace and they didn't play a direct way of football. They just knocked it about. United are going the opposite, but they don't have any athletes. So when the ball's bouncing around, the other teams are just kind of running through midfield and it's just a vacant, empty space, similar to that Newcastle first goal. So it's just so confused in terms of the thinking. Just to answer the question about Ten Hag, I was always of the opinion, you know what I'm like with Pochettino as well. You've got to give them time. But I just feel like the United job and the United club is one that it just swallows you whole. And when things start to go wrong, there just seems like this feeling of inevitability. And the problem I have, and we've spoken about it time and time again, Ayub, and you mentioned it after the Wolves game, but then you never thought it'd continue, is they've not had one good performance this year. And it's just like, more and more of these performances / results will come because your performances dictate how many good results you're going to get. So the worry I would have is that I don't see any reason why United are going to go on some sort of superb run in terms of performances, which tells me that these kind of hiccups are going to keep coming. So I think these next games are vital. Do I think a defeat tomorrow could be fatal? I do. I really, really do. But I think they probably will give him some time, irrespective. They'll see how the Champions League group pans out. They need to beat Copenhagen in the second game. and go from there. I think this well could be Ten Hag's last season, irrespective. So, yeah, it's difficult right now to see him as coach of United next season.
Right, we've got to give the final word to the Manchester United supporters. So, Dennis, what is, as a Manchester United supporter, after the season that you've had thus far, what is your expectations? What are you hoping for now until the end of the season?
I think expectation and hope is something different, of course, in these circumstances. I think expectations, I fear a little bit that we're gonna end, because if we look at the season so far, we only won, I think, against the bottom 6 team or teams, or maybe 7. So, and also not in a convincing way. So I don't expect a lot of the team the rest of the season. So maybe something, yeah, I think like maybe 8th or 9th. I'm not even sure we're gonna get top 6, because there are some good teams like Aston Villa who are already a lot higher than us, and I'm not thinking that we're gonna get them back. So that's of course the expectation. The hope is that of course that we turn things around and things will get better. I don't hope anymore for top 4. I think that the 4 top teams are playing well, and I don't think they will get a setback that big that we will catch them. But just hope that maybe we can get to 5 or 6. That will even be a success, and that we of course can also do something nice in the Champions League. But expectation is something different. So far, I'm not really a big hope.
I'm glad you didn't say you're expecting a top 4 finish, because
No.
I would have cut you off straight away. All right, okay. That's that's in. We've spent about 30 minutes talking about the rubbish of Manchester United. Let's go the other way. Let's talk about the Ballon d'Or, and that's been a little bit controversial as well. Messi has won it for the. I believe it's the 8th time. There are some who consider it to be richly deserved. There are many others who consider it to be something which is not deserved. So, OS, what's your thoughts on Messi winning his 8th Ballon d'Or? Do you think it was deserved?
It's such a tough question, to be honest. I found this a bit difficult because I always want to be fair when I answer these questions. I'm going to have to break it down for you, if that's okay. So this is, Dennis, correct me if I'm mistaken, but this is based on the season 22-23, really. So pretty much
Correct,
based on last season, right? So Messi playing for Paris Saint-Germain at the time, 16 goals, 16 assists in 32 games in Liga as they won it again. Paris Saint-Germain, which you will tell you is not the most difficult feat. He scored, but obviously we had the World Cup halfway through last season as well. Obviously everyone knows the story there, leading his country to World Cup glory, the only trophy missing from his cabinet in terms of team honors. 7 goals, 3 assists in 7 games, leading Argentina past France in the final. 4 goals and 4 assists in the Champions League in 7 games. So that was his kind of contribution last year in terms of what they judge it on. So I guess the 3 players that were in the running for this, and I don't know, I just want to quickly ask you guys, I think it was only ever going to be Messi, Haaland, or Mbappe, with perhaps the focus around Messi and Haaland a bit more. So just going to run through those players. Mbappe, 29 goals, 5 assists in 34 games for Paris Saint-Germain, 8 goals and 2 assists in the World Cup, leading France to the World Cup final, and obviously narrowly missing out against Argentina on penalties, and that was in 7 games. 7 goals, 3 assists in 8 Champions League games. So still very, very strong contributions. He won French Player of the Year for the 4th time running, so that was 4th year running. I think Zlatan's won it 3 times, so this was a record 4 times in a row. And then you've got the main machine, Erling Haaland, in the Premier League, right? So 36 goals in the Premier League, incredible. Probably on his way to another 36 this season as well. But 36 goals, 8 assists in 35 games, obviously breaking Alan Shearer and Andy Cole's single season record of 34 goals. 12 goals in the Champions League, 1 assist in 11 games, leading, I say leading, quotation marks, Manchester City to Champions League glory after many years of trying under Guardiola and other managers. In all, in the entire season, that's 60 goals and 10 assists in 62 games. We all know what Erling Haaland contributed last season, and he's well on his way this season as well. The question is, was Messi's Ballon d'Or, and I'll give you the floor, was it deserved? I've answered this before. The Ballon d'Or I don't really care for the award too much. I get it; it's prestigious, everything else that comes with it. There's a glitz, the glitz and the glamour, the ceremony. I get it, yeah. And when Ronaldo and Messi were at their peak, it used to be interesting to see who was going to win it. But for me, it's about who's the best player in the world. That's all I care about. And I can normally define who the best player in the world is. For me, that's Kylian Mbappe. He's the best player in the world, at least for me. And I think he's consistently shown that over the last couple of years. And the question for me is, so I have Mbappe as the best player in the world. Why? Even if you look at it between them, they both won Liga. They both got to the World Cup final. And one team won because of a penalty save or two. I mean, it went down all the way to penalties. Mbappe also scored a hat-trick. Obviously, Messi scored twice, but a hat-trick, but also a big contribution with that bicycle kick, to kind of drag his team back. And it was an incredible moment. So for me, it comes down to moments. And I guess why Messi, the romanticism of football, is the one World Cup trophy. I get it. But So therefore, I have Mbappe as so this is a bit of a clumsy way to answer. Mbappe I have as the best player in the world. I don't even think it's that close, to be honest with you, between him and Messi. But if you're going to give it in terms of team, in terms of honors, in terms of what the contribution was towards team honors and all the rest of it, I would have liked Haaland to get the nod, to be fair, to win the treble, to be the deciding factor in a lot of ways. I remember, Dennis, we were texting one another at the time, and I remember thinking if he was to just have one big contribution in the semis or the final, I think that would have rubber stamped it for him. And even though he makes the contribution, because ultimately, anytime you have Erling Haaland in your team, it contributes in many different ways, not just in goals and assists. Of course, obviously they thumped your other team 4-0 in the reverse leg at the Etihad in the semi-finals. And yes, he didn't have a moment against Inter Milan. But for me, Haaland, in terms of what he meant, in terms of what he meant for Manchester City, the fact that they won the treble, which is incredibly difficult to do. Yes, Messi won the World Cup, but I mean, Haaland's the better player right now, right? I mean, we're not really disagreeing. And again, Messi had some good statistics for Paris Saint-Germain as well. But I'm not going to mourn about it too much, because ultimately the World Cup is the World Cup. But honestly, he's the third best player out of those three. I mean, I don't really think that's debatable. So fair enough. I'm not going to mourn about it too much, but there you have it. I would have liked Haaland to have got it, to be fair.
That's fair enough. Dennis, what's your thoughts?
I think you guys give a lot of good points, because I have a little bit the same way of thinking. So I also made the comparison between Mbappe and Messi. So of course they played for the same team, and looking at what they did in the French league, indeed Mbappe received the Player of the Year award. Although I have to say it's a French competition, I'm not sure if that helps. Of course, a French player, but
Yeah.
if you look at goal contributions, also indeed in France, I think was a little bit the same. Mbappe scoring way more goals, Messi giving more assists, but actually those numbers were not so spectacular for players on that level in the French competition. They were far behind Haaland, of course, what they did in England. Also think at the World Cup, I understand why they chose Messi, because of the fact that it's a romantic story, of course. Arguably the best player, the greatest player of all time, who's putting the cherry on the cake.
Dennis still had to say arguably, because
I'm not gonna say he is, so because of my background, of course, but no. So of course, putting the cherry on the cake and winning it, and it will always be the story like Messi winning the World Cup for Argentina, like Maradona did in Mexico in '86. With other teams in the past, it was more like a team effort. Right now, the focus was, of course, on him, which is understandable given the career he had. So I understand that people also at that moment giving him the Player of the Tournament award. Although for me, that moment, I think Mbappe was maybe slightly better that tournament, although it's close. So I understand that too. But if you look at the stats he had also in the Champions League, Messi scored indeed 4 goals, 3 of them against Maccabi Haifa, which is not really a great team. So I wouldn't say on a club level that he had a great season. It was for his level quite average. And of course, the World Cup was a big thing. And if you look at Haaland, he couldn't participate in the World Cup given the country where he's coming from, of course. But what he did in the Premier League, breaking all goal scoring records, they were in England, and also in Champions League, scoring 12 goals. And what you guys said, of course, if he was more crucial in the semi-final and the final, maybe scoring one or two times in that final, then people would think more about Haaland. Right now, it's more like doing well in the competition or in the league, which is for some people they're not always looking at the league. And Champions League, of course, he did great things. Also against Bayern, he scored 2 times, I think. But yeah, in the final stages, he was not so doing so many things that people say like, wow. So maybe that's the reason why. But if you look at the numbers for all season, I think Haaland also should have got it.
I agree with both of you. I think it's an absolute travesty. It's a disgrace for Messi to
Steady
win
on
that.
you, steady on.
I'm being. This is it. Absolutely makes a mockery, and it's always this romantic story, and just they won the World Cup, yes, but it's not unheard of. Manuel Neuer, I think, was part of the German team that won the World Cup. I think Bayern won the league, but he didn't get, and he was at his peak at the time. Andres Iniesta as well has been in a similar position where Spain have won the World Cup. He's been exceptional, but he's not won the Ballon d'Or. So it's not unusual where you've been an exceptional player, won the World Cup, and that in itself gives the reason why you should be given the award. I think Haaland plays in the toughest league in the world, without a shadow of a doubt. I think the French league is, in my opinion, about 25th in terms of the standard leagues. I have absolutely no.
Come on.
No. I'm being this is something.
Dennis, he's got the Belgian league ahead of the French league.
Yeah, I thought maybe Belgian league is
No.
slightly lower than the French league.
No, but I do. I've never. It's a. If you're a top player, there is nowhere. I mean, that's why I'm amazed that Mbappe is still there. I know eventually he will move, probably next season, but he should never have. He should have moved 3 years ago. Messi, to me, has always wanted to be a big fish in a small pond. I mean, he stayed at Barcelona at the time. Obviously, Barcelona were an exceptional side; they won lots of trophies. But his decision then to go to France, I think, it wasn't based on footballing reasons. There were other reasons, maybe financial, maybe again he wanted to be a big player in perhaps not a competitive league. The fact that now he went over to America, that's the biggest disgrace. That's the absolute biggest disgrace. Haaland not only was an exceptional performer, he contributed to Manchester City winning the treble, the Champions League as well. I mean, that is without shadow of a doubt the biggest club competition in the world. You're right, Dennis. He obviously couldn't play in the World Cup because obviously Norway hadn't qualified. But that shouldn't take away what he did. The number of goals that he scored, the league that he plays in, that should never be underestimated. That Premier League, to score the amount of goals that he did, is exceptional. I think that even without playing the World Cup, he should have been streets ahead of Mbappe, who should have been second, and Messi. I mean, to be honest, really, Messi wouldn't have been in my top three. So I think it's a disgrace. The Ballon d'Or, scrap it. There's no point. It's a joke.
Calm down. I think De Bruyne came fourth and Rodri came fifth. I think Alvarez was seventh, maybe. Yeah, look, I don't feel as strongly about it as you do, and I didn't have Haaland a mile ahead of Mbappe, but I mean, fair, okay. I mean, PSG obviously got bounced, I think, of the last 16, right, in the Champions League. So I think if they'd gotten a bit closer, maybe. But he did get to a World Cup final, Ayub. So let's not, scoring 8 goals, I should say, along the way. I think Haaland should get it. I don't mind Messi getting it in the sense that listen, even in a very poor league in terms of competition, 16 goals and 16 assists. It is what it is. It's not as if he's just fallen flat on his face, but agree, the level of competition, given PSG's dominance, plus the fact, obviously, the players around him, I agree. The French league isn't what won him this trophy. I just think, as Dennis mentioned, the romantic side of things, the story, the pictures of him kind of wearing the robe and lifting that trophy, it's probably the picture of football, right, in terms of the year 2022. So I get it. The Ballon d'Or is always going to be synonymous with Lionel Messi, and rightly so. 8 Ballon d'Or trophies is incredible. I just think you're right. This season, Haaland, in terms of his contributions, in terms of City winning the treble, and most would say any other year, he'd be a shoo-in. Obviously, this unusual year of having a Winter World Cup. The question is, I guess, it'll be interesting to see moving forward, right? I mean, this year, for example, this next year, Haaland's probably going to score 30 plus goals in the league, right? And if we accept that he's going to score 30 plus goals in the league and Man City win the league, they probably would have to win the Champions League as well, I think, for them. But then you've got the European Championships in the summer. So there's always a chance for like an Mbappe to get to the final and maybe France to win it or what have you. And then before you know it, Haaland's gazumped for that as well. I mean, right now, you probably say Haaland's best placed, you would say, maybe, but that would require City to kind of dominate again in terms of winning at least, I think, the Champions League, because I think the Euros would have a part to play. I just wonder, Dennis, whether you think Courtois is the reason why Erling Haaland hasn't won the Ballon d'Or, because Haaland tried his absolute best to score in those 2 games, and if it wasn't for the heroics of Mr. Courtois in goal, especially in the Etihad game when Haaland really should have scored a couple easy, some incredible saves. I wonder whether those would have been the special memorable moments that would have just punctuated his ticket for the Ballon d'Or at the age of 23. Just wonder.
Yeah, that's possible. On the other hand, of course, it was already 4-0 that game, so 1 or 2 more, maybe there was not making the real difference. So if it was like 1-1 and he makes the last minute goal, of course the people will remember that more. But the more goals he make and the bigger opponents he makes them against, that will always help. And I think this year that's a problem with the Ballon d'Or sometimes, that a lot of people not always looking at the statistic. It's more some people vote with a feeling. So of course they remember the World Cup and they think like, okay, this was the moment of the year, so we're gonna vote for him. I think also in the past sometimes, I think last time when Lewandowski didn't win it, a lot of stories that's it's easily that some people vote for one of the Messi and Ronaldo more than for other people, just because they're thinking they are the best players without really looking like what did the player do the last season. I think for this year and also for the last time he won, that's maybe something that happened, and that's a little bit a shame, because in the end the player who deserved it the most should win it, and that's not always the case. Sometimes it's more like voting out of a romantic view on football than really looking at the statistic, and that's not how it should be, in my opinion.
Yeah, just remind me, Lewandowski, I think the award was
Yeah,
cancelled because of the
there are 2
COVID.
times. So one was
Okay.
cancelled that he would absolutely won it because nobody was really close to him.
Mhm.
And then the year after, he also should have won it actually. And then people are talking afterwards like maybe they should stop this award because it's getting ridiculous. So and then yeah, Messi said something like,
People like,
yeah,
you.
you will get your chance later. And then people are saying like, yeah, but this is unbelievable. And I don't think Lewandowski will ever win the Ballon d'Or anymore. Or it must be that Barcelona wins the Champions League. Maybe then, and he's scoring a lot of goals, then maybe it's possible, but otherwise he won't win it anymore because he won't win the Euros with Poland. I don't believe so. So it will be difficult for him. And I think also it's about time that Mbappe and Haaland start winning those awards in the next couple of years. So normally these are the big 2 of the next generation. So I think it's also the last one for Messi, as he also said himself. But I think it's already too much.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's Haaland, Mbappe, and Archie Gray's time. What do you think, Ayub? Just
I'll let you know after tonight's game against Leicester.
Yeah, let's see. Good stuff.
Right, and on that note, we'll call it a day. So, as always, wonderful to have you on the show. And Dennis, heartfelt thanks. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope the viewers have got a different insight from a Manchester United fan, but Belgium-based. In fact, I never quite asked you, where did the love for Manchester United come?
Actually, I think it has to do with my father. Not that he's a fan, but with a lot of my teams, also the Belgian team I have, it started with just getting shirts like when I was 8, 9 years old. So one of the first shirts I had was from David Beckham from Man Utd. It was around 99. So of course a period where we were quite successful. And I think probably because I don't remember at that moment, but probably I just liked to wear the shirt, and the next shirt was again a shirt from Beckham, another shirt. So I think that's how it started. With most of my teams, I remember that's the beginning point, and from that moment on, it was always Man United in England. So
Yeah,
I'm not sure if my father knew what he was doing at that moment, but that's how it started.
I bet there's regrets now.
Yeah, I was going to say, and I think,
Maybe.
yeah, now I know why you support Real Madrid, because you kept getting David Beckham shirts, and then he moved to Real Madrid, so you probably got
No,
David
that
Beckham.
was already. Yeah, it was also. That's a different story, because also with the shirts, but we always went on holiday to Spain, actually to the Canary Islands, Tenerife and Gran Canaria. So every time you go to a shop, always they say buy a shirt of Real Madrid or Barcelona. So in the beginning, I had more sympathy for all these teams, more than, for example, for Bayern or Juventus, who was also a great team at that moment. So it was always a little bit these teams, and at a certain moment I had to choose between Real Madrid and Barcelona, of course, because it was not a healthy thing to have sympathy for both. But that's how it started also. So it all started with shirts, actually. So
Fantastic.
Right.
Good stuff. I mean, Ayub, just before we finish up, just to explain that, Dennis is obviously an incredibly passionate Manchester United supporter and Real Madrid supporter. And I often used to say to him, just to test his kind of allegiance, is that, well, what happens if they face one another in the Champions League? And I've asked this question probably every season. I don't think that's something he's going to have to worry about this season. So at least that's something. Yeah, exactly. So all good. Good stuff.
Absolutely fantastic to have you. And we look forward to having you on again. Hopefully, it will be when Ten Hag is sacked.
I hope it will be when we win the Champions League against all expectations. But
I'll need to be about 100 years old.
Yeah, maybe. But then maybe not with Ten Hag then.
Exactly.
Right. And also, I would implore our viewers, please send Dennis some books so he can put it on his bookshelf. I've never seen a man with a bookshelf without no books.
It was already there when I bought the house, so that's the reason.
All right, absolutely great. So let me do the housekeeping as usual. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Smash a like, please. Share with your friends. We'll be dropping, I think, another episode in a few days' time. So until the next time, stay on side.